Item 4 in the speaking section is actually the second integrated speaking item. So the general specific task is item 4 on the speaking section, and it's the second integrated speaking task. And here, this is going to get a little bit more complicated than the previous integrated speaking task because it's more academic, and you have to be more careful with the relationship between the text and the lecture. Okay, again, the sequence is going to be really important. You really need to know where you are in the sequence at all times. And in fact, the sequence on this item is exactly the same as the sequence on the previous item. It's just the type of information that you get, which is different. So again, you're going to read. This time it's going to be an academic article that you're going to read. It's very short. You're going to have 45 seconds. Then you're going to listen, but this time it's a lecture. It's an academic lecture on the same topic as the reading. Then you get the question. Then you get 30 seconds of preparation time. Then you speak again for 60 seconds. All integrated items are 60-second speak time. Okay, so here things are going to get a little bit more complicated. The reading provides you with the general information. Remember, the task is called general specific. So here you get the general information. The title is going to be the main concept, the general idea of what the text will be about. And then in the body of the text, you get a definition of what the general idea is. Then you get some characteristics of that general idea. And sometimes there's going to be two concepts in the general idea, and you'll get more definition and more characteristics. So the important information here is going to be the general idea, which is the title, and then these defining characteristics. So here there's a lot more information that's important. At first you just want to focus on probably the general idea, and then maybe the very last characteristic, the final sentence or the final sort of characteristic given in the text is often the one that correlates to the more complicated part of the lecture. So again, the text disappears. You don't see it ever again. And we move on to the listening. And here you get the specific information. So imagine that the professor gave you the article to read for homework. And he wants to explain the concept in the article by giving you some specific examples that illustrate the point. So usually you get two examples. And in example 1, they'll give you he or she will give you some detailed information about why this example exactly meets the criteria of what the concept is in the reading. So, this example will be exactly correlated to the information in the reading. And then with example 2, it's the same thing. You have detailed information about why this is a good example of the text. This part is a little bit less structured than the other items, which means that sometimes you have 2 examples. In very small number of cases, you have 3 examples. On occasion, you have 1 very long and complicated example. The most common is that you have 2 examples, and you should expect to have 2 examples, but this can change a little bit. And the most common structure that they give you is the second example is significantly more complicated to understand and to explain. So that's why in the text you want to focus on that final piece of information in the text, so that in the lecture you're ready for the second example, which is usually a more complicated example, and you want to be ready to comprehend it and be able to explain it. Let's take a look at an example of the way that this item might be constructed and the way that the text and the lecture integrate. So this is something that I just invented that will help us to see these relationships. So obviously you start out with the text, and here is this example. Dance music versus hip hop. Both are contemporary, popular types of music. Dance is characterized by a constant rhythm, electronic instruments, often with no or very limited vocals. Hip hop often has more complicated rhythms. Instruments can be electronic or acoustic, and almost always incorporate vocals. Okay, so this is the text. If you notice, it's general information, general categorical information about these 2 types of music. And now I'm going to give you the lecture. You're not going to listen to a real lecture. It's just the information from a lecture. So here we have a professor, and he's going to talk about specific examples of dance music and hip hop. Okay, so Lady Gaga's Poker Face is a good example of dance music. Very limited vocals are mixed with a constant repeating beat pattern that is heavy on low frequencies. While there is a strong vocal presence on the track, the focus is really on the electronic instrumentation and the heavy beat, which is ideal for dancing. On the other hand, Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind is an excellent example of a hip-hop song. While the rhythm is repetitive throughout the song, which is not typical of hip-hop, this is still a hip-hop song because the focus is really on the powerful lyrics and the vocal presence. The instruments are a simple mix of guitar, piano, and drums with almost no electronic synthesizers, and the catchiness of the song comes from the wordplay and the strong singing on the track. So you can see that what the professor is saying, these are very specific examples of dance music and hip-hop. So they have very clear correlations between the types of characteristics that they have. You know, the text talks about rhythm. Dance music has rhythm. This Lady Gaga song has a very strong rhythm pattern. Also, dance music has little or no vocals. Here they say that it has vocals, but that's not really the point of the song. It's really about the rhythm and the instrumentation. And also, electronic instruments are used according to the text. And in the lecture, we see that this song is almost entirely created from electronic instruments. Okay, then in the other example, we have hip hop, and it's a little bit different. It's more complicated rhythms. And here they say, this rhythm is not that complicated, but this is still a hip-hop song because the focus is really on the vocals. Oh, I'm sorry, the instrumentation is very simple because it's just piano and guitar and drums. We're not using electronic instruments. And this is a hip-hop song because the vocals are really the central point of the song and the thing that people are really interested in. So what you're doing with your preparation time, which we'll look at in a minute after the question, is you want to identify these connections between the text and the lecture. This is the most important part of this item because you're going to need to explain that what the professor is saying is directly correlated to the characteristics given in the text. So now you get the question. The question here is basically always the same. And it's some version of why is the lecture a good example of the title of the text. So why is the professor's point an example exactly of what the text is explaining. It's not that useful, but sometimes they give you some vocabulary or some other piece of information that helps you to focus what you're doing in your plan. So here you do want to pay attention to the question. Make sure that you understand exactly what the question wants you to do, because it can help you to eliminate some information that's not useful. Okay, so in the prep, what you really need to be concentrating on is what is the information that is going to let you explain that whatever the professor is talking about is a good example of the concept defined in the text. And the way that you do that is you need to think about, the two things that you got. So look at your notes that you got from the lecture, find the two examples, and then relate them to the information that you got in the text. And it's important to know that sometimes the examples will have a bit of a mix of the general characteristics. So example 1 will have some of the characteristics but not all. Maybe example 2 will have all the characteristics or only one of the characteristics. This is another part that can be a little bit complicated. And the most important thing in the end is to identify that the characteristics in the end are the same. So the professor's characteristics directly correlate with and are exactly the same as the characteristics given in the text. The tricky part here is that it's really common that one of the examples is more complicated and the professor will focus on it more. So you want to identify that example and predict that it's going to be a little bit more difficult to explain, but that it's also more important. So one of the examples you can probably talk about relatively quickly and maybe not give me all the details, but the professor will probably focus more on, the second example in general. It's the second example. And you want to explain that example a little bit more and then tell me that that example is an example of the concept described in the reading passage. So when you speak, you're going to have a bit of a script, like you do with all items, and it's going to look sort of like this. Okay, the text is about the title, which is, and then some quick defining features. The professor gives an example, some examples. The first example is, detail, detail, detail. And then you want to say that this is an example of something mentioned in the text. It's very important that you mention this because this is the integrated item, and what you're supposed to do is identify the relationships between the two things, and this is the relationship. This example is an example of something written in the text. And then you do the same thing, the other example from what the professor said. This is a good example of the definition given to us in the text. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things that you basically need to say. So again, the cheat sheet, or for you Spanish speakers, the chuleta, is what you're going to have written down before you take this test, so you can look at it before you look at the item. And you're going to have these different things: the main topic of the text and lecture, the definition of the topic, and then the 2 examples. Okay, and so quick summary, this is the 4th item in the speaking section. It's the 2nd integrated item. And to be honest, many people find this to be the most difficult integrated item. Okay, good luck.